Yeah. Hey everybody, it's your girl Charlotte Van Horn with Black Expats in Panama. And I've been missing y'all, so I'm coming at you. And I've been wanting to get Miss Jewel Pearson on the show. She is the owner of Miss Bohemian Soul. She is the tiny house lady. She is the one y'all been sweating me about an interview with, and I'm just so happy to be here with her today. What's up, Miss Jewel?
Hey there, Charlotte. I am happy to be here with you. Thank you. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm glad we were able to connect and make it happen.
Me too. And I'm also just glad that we were able to meet, period. Okay?
Absolutely.
Because you are
Absolutely.
sister, just
Well,
period.
thank you.
And,
Mutual.
So thank you. So I just wanted to tell us a little bit about yourself, Miss Jewel.
So I live in Charlotte. I consider Atlanta home, but I kind of go back and forth between Charlotte and Atlanta. I built a tiny house in 2015, started researching, and it was kind of the lifelong dream that I was going to live a smaller lifestyle. And I kind of thought about it as just being able to be irresponsible, a single mom, having raised a daughter as a single mom. There was a lot of responsibility. And so I decided that once I had completed all of that, I wanted to be irresponsible. And that was in my original dream, the thought of living in an RV and just traveling throughout the country. And then as it got closer to the time, I stumbled on a story of tiny houses in around 2012, and did my research and just decided that that's what I was going to do. So I completed the build in 2015 and have lived in my house ever since then. Briefly on a break now, not living in it because I had to relocate it. So I'm getting it back together so that I can move in it, and I'll be back in it by end of May.
Well, that is one thing that I found interesting, is that actually tiny houses, you can have a one that is mobile, or you can have one that is stationary.
Yes. So mine is mobile. It's on a triple axle trailer. It's actually built on the trailer versus being built on a foundation. And there are kind of a number of reasons why you would build that way, because as you get into building, a lot of your expense is associated with building on a foundation, your permitting and all of the expense that goes with actually the build process on a foundation. So building on a trailer allows you to kind of skirt that issue of building on a foundation and the cost associated. And so that is why people build on the trailer, as well as the opportunity to be mobile with your home.
So that is that kind of brings into some of the questions. So when people this is kind of new to a lot of us. And so when people first start thinking about, because you found out about tiny homes, you said in about 2012, 2013, and then you built in 2015. So you actually did your research for about 2 years.
Yes, absolutely. That was key to my process. I'm a project manager, so I kind of have to know all of the ins and outs. That's just kind of the way my brain works. And so my research process was knowing everything about tiny houses, the build, the lifestyle, everything from building on the trailer, all of the components. And so I did all of that research during that time period. Worked with my sister to design my house, and another friend that helped design the house. And even before getting to design, paying attention to how I used my space, the spaces that I lived in. So by the time that I was deciding that I was going to build a tiny house, I had downsized to living in a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. But what I was doing before starting the build was paying attention to how I used my space and the things that I had to have in my space. And I had kind of started with a list of like my must-haves, my nice to have, my wish list, my nice to haves, and then, kind of my wish list things. And that was key to designing my house. And I feel like it has been key to the success of me being, still being in love with my house 6 years later. Just knowing, building it so that it was custom to me and my lifestyle.
And it is. And I don't know if you all have seen some of Miss Jewel's videos, but your house is gorgeous.
Thank you.
It really is. And now, okay, can we just talk a minute about your house?
Absolutely.
So your house, and I'm all over the place. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited.
No, you're fine.
I'm okay. So so your house is how big?
So interior space, if I count my 2 overhead lofts, it's 360 square feet of interior space. And that's interior, like I said, counting the 2 overhead lofts.
That is amazing, because and I guess I feel like when you say that, I used to have, my first salon space was 300 square feet. Mm-hmm. And every time I see that and I look at your house and I'm like, I don't understand, because like that's 300 square feet. I just can't imagine doing all those amazing things that you did in your house.
So again, that's where your design comes in. So a lot of the reason why my house doesn't seem as small as you might think of, excuse me, 300 or so square feet, I have a lot of windows. And so that opens the space up for one thing. And that was kind of on my list of must-haves, because light and sunshine. Did I lose you?
Mm-mm.
Oh, the screen is frozen on my side. Okay. So having ample light and openness was important to me.
All right, we good.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So you were asking me about the space. So I have, it does seem like a very small space, but that goes back to the importance of design. So I have a lot of windows so that it doesn't feel like, you're in a box. So I have a lot of windows on all sides. That's important to me. Big windows. Yeah, so that's important. So it opens up the space. It also gives me a lot of light, natural light. And then in the design, making sure that a lot of the stuff in my space does double duty. Like my bathroom door is an IKEA mirror that slides, that I put on rollers so that it slides, but it also gives my space a mirror. With my bedroom space up above, that wasn't taking up the interior space, because my sleeping space is above, but and then
your couch.
I've got so my house has always been the entertaining space, so I wanted to be sure that I still had the opportunity to entertain and it was comfortable. So my comfortable couch, I actually have a walk-in closet and I have a full kitchen, but that was, again, being prepared and designing it so that it made sense and would work and accommodate everything that I needed in that space.
So I'm starting to see more and more Black people getting engaged with learning about tiny homes. What do you think that we should be learning about it, and how do we fit into that? What do you see it? What do you see?
So I'm excited to see more of us getting involved and getting excited about it, because I can tell you in 2015, when I was talking about it, a lot of Black people were looking at me like I had a couple of heads.
I probably would have been one of them.
It didn't make sense to them. I have heard from people that they feel like we stopped again, Charlotte.
We're good.
The screen.
All right.
So yeah, I am excited to see us getting involved in the movement. When I started and I was talking about it in 2014 and 2015, people were looking at me like I was crazy. Some people had asked me, did I need a place to stay? Like, was, I experiencing a hardship? And then I got a couple of messages where people felt like I was trying to deter us from achieving the American dream of home ownership, like I was doing us a disservice. And what I feel like, and what I feel like even more today, is that the American dream as it's considered isn't necessarily the same dream for us. I mean, if you look at stats around home ownership year after year after year, Black people remain at the bottom of the list for home ownership. And that's just that. I mean, you can go back and look at the numbers, and that's just the way it is. And home ownership and land ownership is how wealth is built, generational wealth is built. And if we just continue being at the bottom of the list, we're not building generational wealth. And so you have to consider that that dream doesn't work for everyone exactly the same. And so there has to be an opportunity where you start thinking about home ownership in a different way. And so for me, that's what tiny houses bring to the table. It's not for everybody, I get that, but it's an opportunity for us to get to home ownership quicker. One of the things that I've been doing is, so we have a lot of Black farmers. If you look at the numbers for Black farmers, they're losing their land year after year, and the percentages of Black farmers has dwindled, I think, almost to the single digits from years ago where we owned a lot of farmland. Yeah. And so one of the things that I have been trying to talk about is, so one of the challenges with tiny home owners, the ones that are on wheels, is finding somewhere to place it. So an opportunity to match Black farmers with people who live in mobile tiny houses who are looking for places to park their houses. So it's a benefit, a mutual benefit. Right. So you're providing, the tiny house owner would be providing rent to that Black farmer, helping them financially. The Black farmer would be providing a place for them to locate their tiny house. And I'm not talking about selling property, I'm talking about a rental situation. Yeah. And then the tiny house owner even might be interested in helping the Black farmer in tending to their farm. There's might be the interest, and so then there's that physical help. And so it's something that we have to consider as we look at the housing models. And I think it's clicking now for a lot of us as we are, especially as COVID has hit. I mean, if we consider the pandemics of racism, the pandemic of COVID that we just, went through in 2020, I think people are having to reimagine a whole bunch of things around their finances and what their living situations are, because they found themselves in some really bad situations. And so I think it's starting to click. Downsizing and living within your means and living below your means so that you're able to save, and you're having an opportunity for building generational wealth. I mean, when I talk about pairing tiny house owners with farmers, or then if you think about the opportunity to get to home ownership quicker. So I own my home straight out. So then that allows me the opportunity to save my money. Mm-hmm. Versus having to continue to pay a mortgage. And even when, and so that was a financial opportunity that I had to be able to use, 401k and savings, and some of my friends helped me. But that was a financial opportunity that I had. But then even people who are having to go into loans for tiny houses, it's still not the 15 and 30-year mortgage. Right. So because and I often hear people say, well, so I paid probably about $85,000 for my house when I built it in 2015. Mm-hmm. And so then I've been hit with people who say, well, I can buy a regular house for that. One, I know the places that I want to live. I can't buy a house for $85,000. And then even if you consider buying a house for $85,000, by the time you factor in that 15 or 30-year mortgage, you've paid 2 or 3 times $85,000. So it's not the same apples for apples. And so it's really something that we have to consider in our community as we look at the home ownership model that doesn't necessarily fit us.
Well, and then when you talk about that, that is a way of being a homeowner, but not being so straddled down with the debt. Because Absolutely. It's like this, you're constantly balancing that. And a lot of people are house poor.
Absolutely.
House poor. And also, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, the kinds of family units that might be attracted to tiny homes. Like, for example, I'm thinking of a young couple, where they can have it, custom designed, for that's probably even a little bit more challenging. You might need a little bit more space with 2 people in there. But check this out. When you come into homes, like especially homes that aren't like built like today, first thing you see is a formal dining room.
Right. The space that you end up dusting.
Exactly. Yeah. Who uses a formal dining room? Right. And so now what you have, and I think with COVID, people had to take a look at their space and take a look at how they're using their space, because when everybody is in the house all the time is different than when y'all out during the day doing what you do. Mom and dad are off to work, and bam, we come, we hook up in the evening, y'all take yourselves to bed, and tomorrow we do the same thing. But
Right.
being able to have productive space, you know, and people probably, I know I turned my dining room into my little office space, and this is where I am. This is one of the dining room areas, and it's like, I don't need this dining room. And it was another room upstairs that I could have used, but I just felt so disconnected from the house. I'm very comfortable right here.
Gotcha.
And so that makes a difference. So do you think that a tiny house option would be, because younger people have different way of thinking? You know, younger people, they ain't looking for no house with no formal dining room in it. You know,
Right, right.
so could it be a way also for, like, you know, young couples starting out or singles, you know, to make an investment where they have their own place, they pay it off, they're not paying rent, they're not paying mortgage? Is that a good option for them as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So like if you pay attention to the movement, tiny houses, van dwellers, RV owners, we are hitting all of those areas where a lot of people don't want to be tied down to brick and mortar. And it's not just singles, it's not just couples, it's families who are prioritizing experiences. Right. Versus, and again, COVID has opened a lot of people's eyes where you're realizing I need to focus on something bigger. So the opportunity to travel with your family and to spend time with your family versus, you know, we're working 80+ hours to pay for brick and mortar, but we're not able to enjoy our family. And so the movement is really happening, and just watching, you know, it take off, and people are full-time RVers and they're full-time van dwellers, and you see them traveling all over the country, and they're showing their children different things that they would not have necessarily, you know, been able to experience otherwise. It's happening. And
traveling all over the world, you know. It's
absolutely.
Like we are connected with Black Expats, and how do you think the tiny house movement fits in with people who want to do the international thing?
So I think it's the same thing, building community, because that's kind of the next step in tiny houses, is building opportunities for communities. And so I feel like people who are considering the expat life have also, it's kind of clicked for them priorities, and they want to live life differently. And so I think a lot of those people are also the people who their mindset is, I don't necessarily need to be tied down to the big house and those things. I want to focus on experiences. I want to travel. I want to be able to enjoy and experience life. And they're not trying to work to pay for a house. You know, they've already made that switch. And so a tiny house fits right into that model as well, you know, even internationally.
So, I mean, realistically, and I guess that people, you can do whatever you set your mind to do. But realistically, as far as a family, you know, how do you think, say, a family, how many people do you think could really live in a tiny house? And what is the range of size in the tiny house? What's what makes it not a tiny house? Is there a number that makes it like, if it's so many square feet? Okay, talk to me.
Yeah, it's supposed to be it initially was like under 400 square feet. And I think now they're saying under 500 square feet. There are actually large families living in tiny houses. It kind of depends on your priorities. You know, there are large families living in schoolies, or where they've converted school buses. It again depends on your priorities. And I follow a Black family, and I think they've got 3 or 4 kids. Oftentimes it's not the end all, the long-term solution. Sometimes it's let's do this now because we want to save our money and be able to pay cash for a home. We still don't want to be in debt. So we're going to do this now, and we're saving our money so that we can build on a foundation, but we're going to do it more in cash. And sometimes it's the long-term solution. So families are downsizing possessions. Because when you think about it, a lot of times those possessions are weighty.
Oh,
And so they're downsizing possessions, and the priority is I want to travel with my family. And so families are living in those small situations and traveling. When you think about it, so for me, my house, sometimes as people are designing their house, their main thing is we want to be out in the world. So we want to, do the hiking. We want to do the beach trips. And so they're not necessarily focused on we're going to be in this space 100% of the time. Yeah. This space is going to be for, sleeping space, for the main necessities, but we intend to be out in the world doing things. And oftentimes they'll have even the outdoor space. So maybe they have their meals outside, so that everything is not concentrated in the smaller space because it's serving a purpose. Then you also have, I read a story about, and I think it was a sister who had a tiny house, and she built 2 tiny houses. And so she had kind of her house and then the house for the children. And there was a connector, porch and connector. So it was 2 tiny houses, but their family was there. Still, building that space that way was cheaper than building a house on foundation. Wow. And so people are being creative with it and thinking through it, because at the end of the day, if I'm able to, so I don't move. So, and a lot of people travel with their tiny houses. They travel with their schoolies and RVs. My house at 28 feet is bigger than for me being able to travel with my house, but it allows me to travel. Okay. And that's important for me. To provide that opportunity in the lifestyle where I'm not having to pay a lot of bills, associated with the mortgage, so I can travel. And then my house, has this kind of main location or home base, if I want to call it. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but families are doing this. It's not just something for singles. And I always get the comments like I had a comment the other day. Somebody commented on my YouTube page and said, "Oh, she lives in a tiny house, so she must have resigned herself to being single." And it's like, how did you get that? It's the
okay. I mean,
right.
So if you live in a studio apartment,
right, same thing.
Designed yourself to be in single.
Exactly.
Or if your life changed, then perhaps you might have to change your space. But you know what I'm saying? It maybe, yeah. But you're living in the way that you want to live. And what I love about you is like, you doing what you want to do. And at the end of the day, that is what's up. I mean, that is totally what's up. But you also talked about traveling. And so when you're traveling, like say if somebody wanted to really have they tiny house on the go, how easy is that? You know how there are RV stops and stuff like that. Is it easy to do that?
So the tiny houses, so there are several families that actually travel, or several people, I should say, that actually travel with their tiny house that kind of built like mine. I would say the tiny houses that are no bigger than about 18 or 20 foot, 20 foot being the max, are the ones that are easier to travel with. I actually was attending a tiny house festival in Atlanta and drove a friend of my, some builders that I know near me in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I took a 18-foot tiny house down to Atlanta and just, a dually truck, hitched it up, and you're just pulling it on the back of your truck. So my house, because of the size of it, isn't something that I would move as frequently as that. But something preferable, I would say probably around 18 feet, but 20 feet would be the max. It's just like hitching up a trailer and they will design it so that it's easier to move. They've got their logistics down packed. So they know, whatever we have to do, we put this stuff here so it's not bouncing around. And if they're used to moving, they've got a whole scenario worked out of things that have to be, kind of tied down so that they can get on the move. And then when they get in place, this, boom, 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 this is what we do to get set back up. And it's just, It's very similar to, traveling with an RV. It just doesn't have the motor attached to it. You have to have the truck that's pulling it.
So I can remember in one of your videos, you were talking about, permits, logistics, and I'm assuming just like anything else, it just depends on where you are. The
Right.
state, right? In Virginia, I know it's like, it's not just the state, it's like by county.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like by county. So when you decide that you want to move your home, how does that work?
Did you ask me about water and electricity? Is that what you asked me?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, the rules vary by county, city by city. They're not at the state level. I will say that most people are in time. The West Coast is doing a much better job with accepting and allowing tiny houses on wheels.
Mm-hmm.
They are cognizant of the fact that there is an affordable housing crisis. They recognize that tiny houses can be a solution for them, not the end-all solution, but an opportunity. And so they're doing the things to allow tiny houses, as accessory dwelling units in the backyard. Yeah. Tiny house community. So they're more open to it. The East Coast, we're always a little bit slower on things. So what you'll find is most people who live in tiny houses on wheels are kind of existing under the radar. So I'm not going to ask. I've attempted to ask the city a couple of times for permission. Yeah. That has not gone well, even though, I haven't given up. I'm still working with the city to get them to understanding tiny houses and allowing them, but I kind of do my thing under the radar. And my house operates very much like an RV. So I have kind of like a power inlet, a water inlet, like an RV would have. Okay. And I connect to the power that is at the location that I'm going to. So if there's some outbuildings or a house that has power, I then connect into that power from that building to power my home. Some tiny houses are operating off grid. They've got satellite, or they're operating from, power banks or, generators. Yeah. Some tiny houses are completely off grid, so they don't need those type connections. But my house runs on electricity.
Okay, that's very interesting. And then when you talk about downsizing, my husband and I, we lived in a 6,000 square foot house. Okay. And I remember my daughter said, okay, like usually people buy a house like this when your kids are young. She said, I'm going to college and y'all buying this house. We found this house, just happened upon it. And we walked into the house and we both said, we really like this. And for the first time, we didn't have kids. I didn't care what the school district was, you know what I'm saying? Right. All I know is we like this house, and we go buy this house just because we can. And we stayed in that house for about 7 years. And then we started to downsize as we wanted to start kind of transitioning to our next life in Panama. Right. And the first place that we leased was 1,500 square feet. Okay. And when I tell you, I have never, in all the houses that we've ever, purchased, I've never missed that house. Once I went back to being smaller, it was just like my life. I mean, the house didn't really feel like a burden at all, but it was like all that space was just so unnecessary. It was like we had 5 dining room sets.
Wow.
Wow. 5 dining room sets. When we got ready to move out of there, it was like a production, But that is when I started to recognize the beauty of simplicity. And it just depends on where you are in your life. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like it's okay if you at that place in your life where you be like, I just want to wild out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Gone with the wind stuff. But it's like when you make that decision that you want to downsize, it is so liberating. It is all I can say. It is. Even with my cat was very misbehaved in that big house. Okay. I'm serious. It was to the point where I really thought about putting her down. I ain't gonna lie. But that what we found out was she had so much space to control.
Too much
It
space.
was
Mhm.
overwhelming to her, and I guess it kept her stressed out. From the day that we moved to a smaller space, never had a problem. She
That's
kept thinking
interesting.
that the door was taking her, the door that go outside, she was thinking like it was gonna go to another room.
Another room. That's interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
even the stress of the cat, I never had any other problems with her. So tell me this. So okay, so you made this jump, no matter what people said, this is what you wanted to do, you did it, and you did it beautifully. Okay, so you ended up on TV. How that happen?
So
That was
when I was building in 2015, you know, like tiny houses weren't obviously as popular as they are now. Nobody understood what I was saying I was building. They were just like, yeah, okay, whatever you're doing. There was an ad on Facebook that I saw one day, and it was from HGTV, and they were looking for people to be on the show. And so you had to fill out an application. I saw the ad, and then that same day, my manager saw the ad. And so I was thinking about it. And so she sent me a note, and she was like, you've got to apply for this. And so I was like, okay. And I had just seen it when her note came in. So I was like, okay, I think that means I have to apply for it. And so I applied for it. And the interesting thing, Charlotte, was when I was filling out my application, it wasn't necessarily one of my best days. It was, you know, bill stuff was happening. I was on the kind of in the stressed out mode. And I was like, these folks getting ready to get, you know, my application, they get ready to get, they got my mood. So one of the questions was, why should we choose you to be on this show? And so kind of the background. So as I was building my tiny house, there were a few other people that I had connected with on social media that were also building. None of them looked like me. Okay. And so as I was listening to them talk about their journeys and the connections that they were making with suppliers and people who were sponsoring things for them, I had tried to have a couple of conversations with some lumber companies, and I very soon realized that it was very much the good old boy network. And so folks weren't responding to me like they were responding to my counterparts. And so I was kind of in that mindset when I filled out this application. And so one of the questions was, why should we pick you to be on this show? And I said, because I'm Black and y'all don't have any other Black people that are building tiny houses right now. And I was like, that's a plus, and I'm gonna use it to my advantage. You all need to be focused on diversity and inclusion. This is what I am, and you all should pick me. And I guess it resonated with them. And so the very next day after I submitted the application, they called me.
No,
and
the
very next day, Charlotte, and I'm so goofy when I saw the number come through, I didn't even answer. I was like, oh my God, like, now what do I say? Here they are on the phone. I don't even know what to say. So I didn't answer it. I let it go to voicemail. And then I kind of took my time later on calling back. But they wanted to do the interview. And so the interview, so they were doing, it was mostly couples who were building at the time.
And what year was it again, Jewel?
2015.
Okay.
So it was couples that were building. And so you were supposed to have somebody that was going through the build with you. I was building my house by myself. And so I was like, okay, so I said to my best friend, you're going to have to be my partner, you know, to go through this process with me for my build. And she is my partner in crime. We hang out and do everything together. So I was like, you getting ready to be involved in this show with me. So we did the interview and they selected us. And so we were on. It was one of the best things that could have happened for my build. So there were a couple of shows that were happening at the time. And so I was on HGTV's Tiny House Big Living. And so they just really followed your build process. There was another show, Tiny House Nation, which they were going in building houses for people. And it was like a process of building a house in like 3 days. They'd go in and meet the people and kind of hear what their story was. And then they would design and build those people's houses. So my show was completely different. They were just following people who were already in the build process. And so I had a fabulous crew to work with, the film crew and the directors and the people behind the scenes. Everybody was fabulous to work with. It gave me a lot of, it was stressful on the backside because I was having some challenges with my contractor. And I wasn't trying to be the ghetto people on, on reality TV. Like, y'all not getting ready to see all of the stuff that was going on in the background. So there was the process of making sure none of that hit the screen.
Yes.
But and my budget was tight. So there's a lot of things that I was making magic in the background that couldn't hit the screen. So that part was stressful, but the exposure that it gave me, for one. And then after the show hit and so many Black people reached out to me to say, until I saw your face, because it was the first time they had seen a Black person in a tiny house.
Yes.
And until I saw your face, I didn't think this movement was for us.
You're the first person I know. You are the first Black person I know with a tiny house.
And so for me, building and realizing everybody around me was white, it didn't bother me. I went to school like that. Like it didn't impact what I wanted to do. Right. But it wasn't until that started happening and I started getting those messages that I realized so many people would be hindered from not seeing representation, to feel like I can't do this because I'm not involved in this movement. That never had occurred to me. Right. But then I started realizing how many people that applied to, and how many people were then open to the idea of, oh, we can do this, or I can do this, or I was thinking about this and my family was saying I was crazy. Here's somebody who has done it. And then for a lot of people who also reached out to me, because at the time, the movement was, the people that were involved in the movement were like, you're not supposed to spend X amount of money on your tiny house, because it was supposed to be the minimalist movement and you're downsizing. And they kind of had these thoughts around how big your house should be. It shouldn't be any bigger than this. You shouldn't spend this much money. And I was like, this is my house. I'm spending my money. So y'all don't get to tell me what to do. Right. And so when my house hit and it had some color and it had some design and some flair to it, and a walk-in closet, that hit with the women. The women were in a nice sized bathroom, and the women were like, oh my God, so you really can have all of this in a house. And then Black people were like, yes, this house resonates with me, because trying to talk about a tiny house with Black people who already haven't had a big house, or they're a couple of generations removed from grandma's house that was the small house and everybody lived there, and their mindset is, I'm trying to do bigger and better. So trying to have the conversation of a tiny house and the benefits of a tiny house kind of goes over those people's heads when they haven't realized, the American dream. Yeah. So seeing my house, and one of the reasons that I'm always sharing my story is so that people can understand you can design it how you want it. It doesn't have to be, I always say, like Laura Ingalls' Little House on the Prairie. It doesn't have to be that work perspective where it feels like, a shack in the woods. It can be something really nice and something, one of the things I always point out is, because it's a small space, you can actually spend more money on, if I wanted to do some expensive tile or something in the bathroom, it's a small space. So I can spend the money on this bathroom and do it where maybe I wouldn't even consider it in a large home. So it's that kind of mindset that I want to expose people to, so that they are trying to grab this barking child. So that they are considering, especially we are considering, that this movement is for us, and thinking outside of the box to say, okay, this house is different. So HGTV that exposure was amazing. Like, I had this older lady reach out to me. She told me she was in her 70s, and she was like, I'd never consider living in a tiny house. She said, but you are the Harriet Tubman of tiny houses. And I cracked up laughing. I was like, I told her, I said, this note I still have the note. I said, this note means so much to me. Wow. I know I haven't done anything as magnificent and as important as Harriet Tubman, but I really was honored that she, you know, sent me that note, and she was saying, you know, I'm so proud of you to show us in this movement.
And I think that when people, and I mean, I can understand that people being skeptical and, you know, not excited, but when they see I had never seen a tiny house like yours, you know, when they see what you've done with your tiny house, then that just, like, you know, me and my girlfriend watched them. You're like, well, this is a whole new thing right here. You know what I mean? We could do this, you know,
that's what always happens. So when I would do the tours early on, I would always have the couple come to my house, and the lady would be like, my husband isn't interested in tiny houses. And then as soon as they hit the door, the husband would be like, oh, okay.
it's
You know,
fine.
it's, you know, this isn't what I had in my mind. Because, you know, people say, oh, you live in a tiny house, you know, they'll do something like that. And it's like, no, I don't live in a box like that. And so, but it, you know, so many people are visual, and they have to actually experience to get it to, or to see it to say, okay, yeah, I could consider doing something like that.
So we, as Black expats in Panama, you know, we have some opportunities with developers who are doing tiny houses in Belize and in Panama as well. And so we are, you know, learning more about it, and, you know, going to launch it and do more as it becomes appropriate. But I think the thing that I learned the most from watching your videos is that I don't know how I would feel like after seeing your house and seeing, like, okay, a walk-in closet is important to me, so my house has to be designed with that. The space is so limited that every inch has to count, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you move into a cookie cutter? That's what I'm trying to think. That's what I'm thinking. How do you move into a cookie cutter?
So I host workshops, and that's one of the things that I say to a lot of people. Like, you have to figure out what your end goal is. So for me, my end goal, my house, I've always said, is my retirement plan. So I knew it had to be designed for the long term, which is why all of that effort went into designing it, making sure the space worked for me. If your goal is, you know, I want to live in this house for, say, 3 or 4 years, because I just want to save my money and then I'm on to my next thing, then that looks like a different conversation. You don't necessarily have to put the effort into design, because it's not the long term.
It's a girl or boy?
It's a girl, Nina Simone, and she's very spoiled.
Yeah, her mama been talking too long, just like kids.
She is very spoiled. So yes, so you may not have to put that much effort into it. But if you are planning long term, and so I always say younger people who haven't had haven't owned their own home and maybe don't have life experience, they may not necessarily
don't know what they really need, you know, what they can and live in, because they coming from they mama, the bedroom at their mama.
Right, and they haven't established themselves. But I always say, I am 53 years old at this point. I have lived in some nice spaces. I know what it takes every day to keep me balanced and on point, and my home is my sanctuary. And so all of that had to go into designing my house so that I would always be centered and comfortable in my space. And when I consider, like, talking about the shows, early on, we saw a lot of people getting out of their tiny houses. They were no longer living in their tiny houses. And when we considered it from the 2 shows, so like I said, the show that I was on, it was following people who were building their houses. So people who had really already designed their houses. The other show, where they go in and meet with the people and then they build the house for them in 3 days, those were a lot of the people who weren't staying in their houses, because those houses weren't really meant for their needs. And so it's kind of hard to back into a space that wasn't designed, you know, for you in mind. It's not impossible, but it's a little more difficult. And I say, if you have the opportunity to design it for you, then especially because of the small space, I'd absolutely advise someone to do so.
So that leads me to, so how did you end up deciding that you would go into business? Tell us about the business and tell us about the services that you provide.
Sure. So Interestingly enough, one of my first posts on Instagram, when I decided I was building, was that I had seen this flyer for what were the leaders in the tiny house movement, and they were having an event. They were speaking at this event. So I'd seen the flyer and it was all white faces. And so kind of my first post, I said my goal was to have my face considered as one of the leaders in the movement, and for my face to be on this flyer, on those types of flyers. And that was just kind of something I put out there. Like I felt like that was going to be one of my goals, because as I was researching, again, I said I'm a project manager. So by the time I finished researching and designing my house, I had a 3-ring binder of information that, I'd attended a workshop, all of my research, my notes, content that I had gathered, I had it in a 3-ring binder. Like I knew what I knew about tiny houses and building tiny houses. And I felt like I had something to offer as far as a speaker. So I put it out there that that's what I was going to do. So then a few months after I built my house, finished my house in March. And then I think it was later that year, around August, that I was invited to speak at a festival. And so that kind of was the kickoff of me being involved in the movement. But then as I started encountering experiences in the movement that were only happening to me because I was a Black woman. So most of my counterparts are able to have they find success with tiny houses in RV parks and in rural areas. And 2 times now I have had to move my house because of racism that I experienced in an RV park, to the point where I had to, have a police presence come through to make sure I was okay. This last time, the things that were going on in the area, the rural area where I was, someone eventually ended up getting arrested for some racist stuff that was happening. So I was, even my first speaking event, on my way to the speaking event. So these events have to happen in the rural areas because they're bringing tiny houses out. So you need spaces. So they're like at fairgrounds, and in Atlanta, they do have an event that's in the city of Atlanta. But most of the other events are kind of in the rural areas because you need, big open spaces to bring in tiny houses and that kind of stuff. And even on my way to that speaking event, I had to make a call because I was by myself, and I had to make a call because I'm in rural Georgia and I'm passing, Confederate flags and all that kind of stuff. And I'm in the deep kind of woods. And I called a friend to say, hey, this is where I am, because
me tomorrow.
Exactly, because I have to operate in a different way. And so going to this event, I realized that's not any of their experiences.
Exactly.
And so as part of what I understood we were doing with the movement as I was getting into it during that time period, was challenging the model of home ownership in the United States. And so acceptance of tiny houses and rethinking the model. And so for me, knowing that the model doesn't always include us, I felt like as we were challenging it, we were also going to be challenging and thinking more about inclusion. Like we were going to be doing all of this. If we're challenging a model, then we need to burn, that other model doesn't work. Let's burn that down and restart it. So if we're starting it over, then we need to think about who is missing from this conversation, who is missing from housing, and let's address that and see how we make this model. If we talk, we've got to consider redlining, mortgage, predatory lending practices, all of the things that have kept Black people out of home ownership. So if we're challenging home ownership and the concept of community and housing, then we've got to factor in all those things. And so as I started talking to these people to say, hey, we're having these workshops, but we need to talk about, because if Black people are going to be in this movement, we need to talk about the challenges that I've had in an RV park. We need to talk about the challenges that are happening in rural areas. We need to talk about the fact that as a lot of my white counterparts were entering the movement, they were selling their houses and using that money to to build their tiny houses. If we already don't have houses, we need to figure out, how am I going to build a tiny house? I don't have the proceeds from a sale to build a tiny house.
Okay.
So we need to talk about all of this stuff so that everybody can be included in this new movement. And I kept getting crickets.
Yes. I was going to say, I bet they didn't receive that.
I kept getting crickets. Nobody wanted to talk about it. I got crickets, and then I got a couple of nasty, anonymous, threatening emails. So I was like, okay, so now I've had, so for a year or so, I was trying to do this inclusion thing, and let's talk about it. And then I was like, so really what you all want to do is keep housing as the status quo, just in smaller houses. Like, you're not really trying to address any of the ills of housing.
Yes.
You just want to keep status quo, but in a smaller home. And so then I realized I had to branch out and do kind of my own thing.
Exactly.
And I needed to speak to my experiences to us, to share how I'm in the movement. I support the movement 100%, but my experience is different as a woman of color. And I'm going to speak to that experience, because as I'm having these conversations with the cities, I also want to say to the cities, I need you to be accepting of tiny houses and allow them in the urban areas, because those are safer spaces for us. And we too deserve to be included in this movement. So my conversation, after a while, I was like, okay, I'm done trying to sit at y'all's tables. I'm going over here to build my own.
That's right.
And so that is kind of what I have been doing I have a colleague, Dominique Moody. She's another sister in the movement, and she's built a beautiful house. So she's my colleague. I have a colleague, Lee Para. She is a white woman, but she's from the DC area. She started the first community in the tiny house community, and she gets it. And so I work with her. Like, she has, when I started getting the nasty messages, Lee jumped in and she had my back. And so we're, colleagues and business partners. She understands, the conversations that need to be had. And so
it's power in diversity.
Absolutely.
It is
absolutely
diversity.
And so she uses her voice.
Exactly.
She uses her voice. And so I offer workshops, all levels of workshops, kind of the, like the level one, somebody that's interested in tiny houses and kind of, not sure where they want to go, all the way up to, building, walking through the build process and then placement. We do zoning workshops. I offer one-on-one consultations, project management for somebody who needs some assistance with the build. And then I am in the process, we're building an organization, because what I want to focus on next in this is community and building tiny house communities and working with landowners and cities to have farmers and to have them rethink housing and the concept of housing, even, movable homes, and not just always focused on communities, on foundation. So that's what we're building now in the next phase of where I want to go with this.
So do you actually design as well?
I sell my plans. I can design, absolutely can design. It's not something that I really want to focus on right now, but I absolutely can do it. If somebody brings me an opportunity to say, hey, will you do this? Yeah, for the right numbers, absolutely. So I won't say no. So yeah, I can design.
So, and when you say, and when I think about, like, because I think that if I wanted to go into a tiny house, I think I would need someone. I wouldn't be able to see what you saw. You see what I'm saying? It's like,
yes,
I wouldn't be able to see what you saw. And when you before I even ever talked to you or met you, when I saw you in your house, it's like your house was such a reflection of you, and that was obvious, and how you strategically set it up so that what was important to you was present. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So, like you were saying, I do cook, but I ain't want to wait. So I ain't want to spend all my space on the kitchen. Okay.
Absolutely.
I get it.
Absolutely.
So I guess like designing a small house would be like really getting to know a person and asking them, you know, what rooms in the house do you use? You know, how do you use them? How much space how much time do you spend in certain spaces and stuff? And then figuring it out from there, right?
I feel absolutely. I feel like my house is an extension of me. It's not just about the building, it is an extension of me. So it's even more than just focusing on building a tiny house. It's kind of like, it's the experience of where do you see yourself going and what's important to you, because this is like your sanctuary, and the smaller your space is, the more you need to make sure it represents you and it is the extension of you. Just like you said, my house is who I am. It absolutely is. And so that's a lot of designing a tiny house and how it's different from, you know, just a bigger house, because it is more of what do I need to have in this house that represents me. One of the slides in the workshops that I do, and it's a quote that says, you know, have nothing in your house that you don't consider beautiful. And that's something that you have to really consider in a small space, because you've got to maximize opportunity. And so I downsized over the course of 10 years, but getting to that smaller space where it was, here are the things that I have to have that make home for me. And you start kind of letting go of the stuff that you just put in this room because you needed to decorate this room. This is the things that make home for me. So like, for example, I have an African statue. His name is Mandela. And he's been at my front door since 1998. And he is part of my home. And so as I was designing my house, I had to make sure I knew where Mandela was going to go, because he's always been at my front door. My nieces and nephews, as they were growing up, they would say, "Oh, that's Auntie's husband." but that was kind of what went into designing my house. And that's why in my workshop, I always say to people, start out with your list of your must-haves. What are the things that you have to have in your space? Then your nice to haves, and then your wish list. Because one of the things that will happen, and I always say, and do it before you get into the process and before you get into the bill, because especially for me, if I think about myself, as I was getting into the build and I had to cut things, my budget was, you know, being impacted. You want to be able to make decisions on, okay, so here's what I can cut. And I know it was on my wish list, or I know it was on my nice to have list. It's not something that I have to have, because later on, you know, when you're in the house a year or so later and you're thinking, why did I cut that out? That was important. I need that every day. I always talk about a lady who was building at the same time that I was building, and her build was happening like about an hour and a half away from us. She lived in this area, and her builder had to make a decision. Like, it was something with the size of her closet and the space that was going to be allocated for her couch. And he was trying to, something was conflicting, something had to be cut down. And so I think he tried to call her, she didn't answer. And so he made a decision for her. And he thought she preferred to have more space in this closet than her couch space. So he devoted that, because in a tiny house, you're dealing with inches.
Definitely.
So he decided to allocate that space to her closet versus the couch space. She was a tall lady. So ended up that her couch didn't fit her comfortably because she had a built-in couch, because it didn't accommodate her. So she couldn't rest comfortably on her couch. And so that was something that impacted her. He made a decision for her. It impacted her build. And I'm guessing every time she sat on that couch, she had to think about it. So that's why I say, you know, the importance of knowing yourself and what you have to have in your space and why that's so important.
Absolutely. You have to know that. And
you have to know.
And I think that he was very presumptuous, knowing
absolutely
how much he was very presumptuous too. I mean, I just would have had to wait till she got back to you.
Yeah, and so then that kind of goes back into the build process, the conversation and the things, the contract that you need to have with your builder. You don't make decisions if you haven't talked to me. And so though that's also some of the education that we give in the workshops, how you need to make sure up front that you know, working with your builder, who's in charge and what the process is for making decisions and making changes to the plan. Yeah.
So I think that with some of the members, and thank you, by the way, for being a part of Black Expats in Panama
Oh, yes.
group. I love you. But I think that some of this information, because there are some people who are interested in doing kind of like the international thing. And I think the one thing that really kind of excites me about the tiny home internationally is the exotic. You know what I'm saying? It's like being able to be near a beach and have that roof that's like the all year round patio you can chill on. So those are kind of the things that I think are attractive in warmer climates,
Oh, absolutely.
do those kind of things. But I think that having a base knowledge on some of the kind of do's and don'ts and the things to look out for when you are going into this, because it is brand new. To most of us, it is brand new. So
Right.
I'm glad that we can tap into your business and take advantage of the skill, the knowledge, the firsthand experience. And like you said, it's like our lives are so different. Even with Black Expats in Panama, it was like I kept looking for something that spoke to me with regard to an Expats in Panama group. And it was just coming up empty. I kept coming up empty. It's like, okay, so when do you get your hair done?
Right.
Nobody's
Right.
talking about that. Like, where are the cultural activities? Nobody's talking about that. There are certain things that we look for and certain experiences that we have that only we understand. You know what I'm saying? And so,
Right.
like you said you built the table. You mean you didn't have a seat at the table, so you built the table. And I think that right there in and of itself is kind of one of the most encouraging things that you touched on tonight, was because sometimes that's just what we got to do.
Right.
We just got to build our own tables. At the end of the day, we just got to build our own tables, because either people don't understand or they just don't care, and I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the fact that you've opened my eyes to,
Absolutely.
tiny houses. And just one more thing before I let you go.
Okay.
Is there any such thing as any existing tiny home communities that you know about? Like, like a planned urban development of tiny homes? No?
There are some throughout the country. The majority of them, like I mentioned, are kind of on the West Coast and in the central states. But there are a couple of communities here on the East Coast. Yes, there are some communities. There are some areas that are getting it. There are also people who are buying RV parks and mobile home parks and converting them to tiny house communities. So yes, there are quite a few communities in the United States. And then, like you mentioned, there are some that are happening internationally. I think from the international focus, it makes sense because a lot of international countries are already used to living in smaller spaces. So it's not as foreign, for pun intended, concept. So it's something that it already makes sense from that perspective.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. This has been a great conversation, and I knew it would.
I think so
And
too.
I know it was a little long. I swear, y'all, I was trying to do 30 minutes, but it's just too good. So if you gotta watch it in 2 parts or 3 parts, then just have at it, but don't miss it. But Miss Jewel, I really do appreciate you taking the time out to talk.
I've enjoyed it.
I just want to know if you have any parting thoughts to leave with us, and also tell us how to connect with you.
I thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. And I look forward to coming to Panama. I'll be there in May on that first trip. Because my goal is part-time living in Panama. So that's, that's how my tiny house fits in it, because I want to have the opportunity to live internationally part of the year. So that's my interest. And so I thank you for allowing me to be part of the group. I am looking forward to, working with you in the future on any endeavors. And you can find me on social media, Miss Bohemian Soul. Also, Tiny House Trailblazers, that's the work that I do with my colleague, Dominique Moody. And I think that's all. Again, I've got workshops and consultations. If anybody is interested in talking further, I'm more than happy to connect with them to do so.
Well, I thank you very much for sitting down with me, and I am definitely looking forward to doing more things together with you. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much. You as well. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Miss Jewel Pearson. And, we've been waiting to talk to her. I'm sorry that the interview was so long. I'm so sorry, y'all, but it was good, right? Was it good? For those of you who are in Black Expats in Panama Facebook group, Jewel is a member of the group. Now she is, she is a professional, and but if you need some guidance, if you need to consult with her through her business, she is there for us. And I think what I really like about it is that she is going to give us the skinny on the experience through the eyes of a person of color, a Black person. And I mean, unfortunate as it may be, it's like, it is what it is. Our experiences are always different. Our experiences are always unique. And I mean, when you think about that sister, saying that she's been in a place where people have literally, threatened her life, because of racism and everything, and how living in a tiny house where you're moving around and being in a rural area, kind of puts us more at risk. I mean, wow, just to have to process all of that in addition to the other information that we process is absolutely amazing. So I'm super honored to have had her on the interview. I hope that this has been helpful to y'all. As always, I look forward to talking to you again soon. This is Charlotte Van Horn with Black Expats in Panama. Until the next time, I will see you later. Thank you for joining. And thank you for all your support. I mean, I just love you. That's all. That's all. Good night, y'all.